Real stories of werewolves, of dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
6 strange stories, beginning with She Left Me, for Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I thought I was in love with this girl, but she mistreated me. She bossed me around and told me I needed to be more polite. I had to say please, I had to say thank you, I needed to smile more, I needed to groom better. Then she left me for this hairy werewolf moron who doesn't even say gesundheit when she sneezes. I'm so mad about it I could bite a pig. I thought our marriage was going better. My wife suddenly stopped whining for me to pay more attention to her, and she stopped nagging me to make love to her more. I figured I must be satisfying her better and that life must be improving. So when this monster man started climbing in my bedroom window, up on the second floor of our home, I grabbed my Louisville Slugger and I started laying some bunts down using his cranium, if you can decipher my meaning. I thought I was battling a guy in a monster mask and a furry costume, but when I hit a ground rule double using his skull, I saw a dog tooth fall out of that skull and land on the bedroom floor. What kind of mask has real teeth in it? Before I could pick up that tooth, my wife grabbed it away and the hairy guy leaped out of the window he had climbed into. When I grabbed the phone to call the cops, my wife took it away from me. Then I got lectured. She took the monster's side and told me I was being cruel and oppressive or some nonsense like that. If a man breaks into our bedroom, I'm going to beat his head in with my bat. But if it's a monster, I'm going to swing twice as hard. She said that my attitude was toxic. I couldn't understand what was going on until eventually I figured out that this was not the first time that werewolf guy had snuck into our bedroom. This was just the first time he did it when I was awake. Yeah, this guy, he had been climbing our house in his werewolf form, coming in that window, messing around with my wife, then turning back into his werewolf form to climb out and run home. He was using his werewolfism to disguise himself and have a human affair with my wife. At the time when I found this out, I was receiving the information as gossip from a mutual friend. I wasn't sure how this guy was scaling walls and appearing as a werewolf, but my initial assumption was that it was an elaborate and sophisticated costume. I then went to my wife's laptop, which she left unlocked, and I read her emails and chats. This guy was telling her that he was a real werewolf in these notes and exchanges. She at first was doubting him and demanding proof, but after a point her tone changes. Then she writes about how exciting it is to witness him changing. I still don't really know how he does it as I write this to you, but my wife, who has filed for divorce, believes that she is leaving me for a werewolf. In fact, she's certain of it. I saw the foul werewolf creep with my own eyes. I smelled him with my own nostrils. I batted him in the face and watched him just sort of shrug it off. He sure did look like something other than a human to me. Now, I've never witnessed him transform. I saw him in his werewolf shape, and I've seen him as a human too many times since then. I've never seen the one become the other. But I don't doubt that he's the same guy I fought with in the bedroom that night. In these hard times, a lot of guys feel disheartened about the idea of ever getting to settle down with a nice woman or have a chance to father a family. But one subspecies of us seems to have no trouble at all finding mates, and that is the werewolf subspecies. The creep she dumped me for has already gotten her pregnant, and he's the father of kids by at least 2 other women that I know of. What kind of kids is he leaving with these women to raise, while he goes out and gets more human women to knock up, stealing them from their human boyfriends and husbands? Is my wife bearing a werewolf child in her belly? The sickest part is that she thinks he's gonna marry her and stop messing around. She thinks she's gonna change him. But more likely, she bears his child and comes back to me, asking me to help raise his brat. She knows that my natural inclination would be to take her back, which is why I have to brace myself for that exact eventuality. If she does come back to me, I'm gonna have to tell her no. I won't give over my entire life to raise some other man's child when he refuses to do it himself. But I most certainly am not gonna raise the son of some animal. And that's what a werewolf is. An animal. She should have thought twice before she dumped me. I will never forgive that woman because she left me for a werewolf. My crazy ex-girlfriend has become a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I don't know what it is with me, but I have quite a track record. One of my ex-girlfriends got her eyelids pierced and started dating women after she dumped me. Another one went completely celibate. And this woman I'm going to talk about right now has gone and become a werewolf. No, that's not a fancy code name or slang term. I literally mean she became a werewolf. She transforms into a partially human and partially canine creature, and she roams the woods outside of town eating squirrels and whatnot. Yeah, she blames me. All three of them blame me. Don't ask me to explain why either, even though you can believe me that I've been lectured to death about what it is that's so horrible about me. None of the reasons seem to have less than 5 syllables in the name. Some of the things I'm supposed to have done, like microaggressions, I don't even think those are real things. I think someone made that up in a woke grievance competition, and I bet they won the prize that day, too. When dimwits talk to me about microaggressions, it makes me macro-aggressive. And of course that's even more problematic when the human race completely stops reproducing and St. Peter asks us why we did ourselves in. We'll be able to tell him it was the microaggressions. You know, maybe our species wasn't meant to survive. Take Molly, for instance. My ex, I mean, not the drug. Molly says the problem with me is that I'm too aggressive. So her reaction is she becomes an animal that tears the heads off of smaller animals, and somehow that makes things better? Does any of that make sense? It doesn't to me. The first time I saw Molly transform into the wolf creature, it was when she was visiting me and the mailman walked over to hand me my mail. We had been chatting in front of the house, and in fact I was surprised at how friendly she was acting. This was after our breakup, and I hadn't seen her for almost half a year. She was chatting me up when the mailman walked over, like I said, and she totally bitched out in front of both of us. That's Molly's term for it, not mine, by the way. She bitched out. She became the werewolf. Her face stretched forward into a dog nose and snout, and she growled in that poor guy's face. The mailman made a little squealy sound, then he ran off. It was like the mailman's natural fear of canines was activated, and he ran back to his stuff and got out of there fast. Molly was laughing at him and saying she clearly wasn't the first werewolf to bitch out in front of that mailman. Now, I don't know why canines hate mailmen so much, but it's clear they do. Another thing nasty bitch werewolves hate is your girlfriend. No matter if you're going steady or if it's the first date, you better hope you don't run into your werewolf ex. She will tell your date private stuff about you that no woman should hear on the first date. Even if she has to make something up, she'll turn that woman off on you. And if she can't do it by smearing your name, then she'll do it the way she did it with my mailman. She'll bitch out in that other girl's face, and from then on, you are werewolf property as far as that other girl's concerned. She's never going to be interested in you again. It's over. Believe me, you don't have a chance if your werewolf ex-girlfriend finds out about your relationship. There's very little in life that's worse than having a psycho ex-girlfriend. In fact, the only thing that is worse is if that psycho ex-girlfriend has some kind of power. In my case, my crazy ex-girlfriend has become a werewolf. I saw a dogman frozen in a cave wall. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my father made enemies of the mayor of this certain town that I won't name, and we all had to run into the hills to hide out. The plan was he was going to kill us all, but make it look like an ordinary home invasion. I won't even get into it. Just don't make enemies of politicians. Just because they kiss babies on TV doesn't mean they play by the rules. or of any human decency at all. My father's side of the family is native, and we had a cousin leading us out of the human world into the world of mist and animal intelligences. He told us that as long as we were there, the criminal politicians would not be able to sense us in any manner, even if we were 30 feet away. I didn't understand why he said it was so, but it was clear that we were in a different kind of a world, even though we were also still clearly in this world too. There was a cave that we went into which seemed like a tunnel for a long time, but then opened up into another kind of reality. It was frozen in there. The walls were ice, and icicles came down from the ceiling, yet it didn't feel as cold as this would imply. There were sheer walls, which were bright blue ice, and in some walls, we could see animal and plant life which had been frozen in that ice. I wondered how long ago these things were frozen. I saw leaves, a large insect like a bee, and in one wall I saw a werewolf, a man-sized werewolf frozen under the ice but standing erect, his 2 feet beneath him, his head with pointed dog ears on top, and his hairy clawed arms out to each side. He looked like he had somehow been flash frozen into that water, and none of us could understand how this could have happened. My brother asked if that cave could have frozen, then tilted over on its side. Was the werewolf originally drowned? Then was that water he drowned in rolled over, so that now he appeared to be standing up, inside the wall of frozen water? It wasn't just a strange thing to see. It was a strange thing to understand. We were seeing an unknown species, and we were seeing it in a context we couldn't understand either. It was confusing and weirdly unnerving, even though it wasn't going to hurt us while it was frozen in the wall. So when my cousin woke me in the middle of the night and told me the werewolf was thawing out, I went into instant fear for my life, for all our lives. I saw it too. As we left, we had to file past the thing, and it was thawing out of that wall. The ice was almost down to its face, and the thing was already starting to smell bad. Our cousin apologized and said he shouldn't have brought us there, and that it had upset the spirits. Our cousin said the werewolf must have been a guardian. We had awakened it, and we were clearly unwelcome. As dangerous as it would be, we were going to have to return to the human world, and take our chances with the kinds of monsters that people are. Nothing so weird ever happened to me again, and I'm going to be 70 if I'm still here in July. I remember it like it was a dream, and yet I'm certain that it really all happened back when I was a teenager and my family was on the run. I saw a dogman, frozen, in a cave wall. My cat preferred to walk upright. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was a kid, we briefly had a cat named Squinky that liked to walk upright a lot of the time. He was a short little cat, so maybe he walked upright to give himself added height, I don't know. I do know that he liked to carry things in his front paws, and that might have been the main reason he taught himself how to do this. It was the cutest and funniest little thing. We would call him our little man cat. He was kinda suave and debonair. You could almost imagine him with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. When he was a kitten, he was the runt of the litter. We took him home from his larger brothers, and he was our only cat. He had these 2 catnip-scented stuffed toys, and he used to carry them from one room to another, one at a time, in his mouth. When we got him a younger kitten brother, he did not want to share those 2 catnip toys. So he figured out how to walk upright on his hind legs. Then he would carry one toy in his mouth and the other in his arms, and he'd do his best to keep both of them away from the younger cat. Eventually he did learn to share, but he kept walking upright after that anyway. Maybe it was because it was so entertaining and we would encourage him to do it. Whatever his reason was, he was walking on 2 legs occasionally right up until the end. I'm sending this into your show because I think that sometimes we go off looking for an entire species to explain every sighting that someone has. What I think, though, is that we're all individuals, animals too. When someone sees an upright walking wolf, it might not mean that there's an entire species of upright walking wolves in that forest. It might mean that there's one weirdo wolf that, for whatever his or her personal reason, figured out how to walk upright. Maybe they did it to be able to carry things in their front arms like my cat Squinky did. But maybe they injured their front arms and walking upright is their only choice. I am not saying that there aren't or couldn't be real werewolves or that there aren't or couldn't be real dogmen that breed and are different from other canines. I'm just saying that I bet a percentage of dogman sightings are of unique individual animals like my Squinky, who have their own personal private reasons for walking around upright. Thank you for listening. I saw a cat with wings. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I used to know a woman whose daughter had a cat with wings. They were full and white and looked like angel wings. I don't think she could flap them, but she would jump off the roof and use the wings to glide to the ground. It was about the funniest thing I ever saw. We'd all fall down laughing when we'd see her do her gliding off the roof trick. This was a small cat. You could have held her in one hand if she'd allowed you to get close enough to do that. But she didn't like to be held or touched, and she could do damage like a much larger cat when she got angry. My mother told me she felt the wings on her back were just matted fur, but nobody ever got close enough to that cat to know for sure. It might make sense since she was never brushed. She was too crazy a cat to get close to brush. She'd have probably ripped your eyes out if you even tried it. But whatever the wings were made out of, they were wings, and she knew how to use them for gliding down from high spots. She seemed to have them on purpose, so if they were matted fur, maybe she deliberately cultivated them, like dreadlocks or something. My uncle told me there used to be a winged cat that would go on the Today Show, and I looked it up. It did in fact happen. It was this little white cat called Thomas, even though she was a girl cat. Her wings eventually fell off and were in fact just matted, unbrushed cat fur. Thomas never flew with her wings though, and after they fell off, she was set loose in the woods. Seems people only cared about her when she could get them on television. Poor little Thomas. So I guess it's not exactly as rare a thing to see as a dogman or anything, but I saw a real-life cat with wings. The Upright Catman of Jersey City. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I used to live in Jersey City when I was a kid into my 20s, when my family and I both moved to Hoboken. When we were in Jersey City, we had an apartment that overlooked Van Voorst Park. Van Voorst is not a huge park, just a couple blocks long in each direction. On 3 different occasions, I saw an upright man-sized were-creature walking down the street next to the park. I want to reiterate that it was on the sidewalk, not in the park. And in each case it was chugging along as though it were in a bit of a rush. It was not running though. I should explain that in those days I used to stay up late at night watching broadcast TV. Late night TV was fascinating to me in those days. It was exciting, believe it or not. It felt electric, and it turned your humdrum teenager bedroom into a receiver of magical information and ideas and sensations. And that was when we'd get to see the Kenny Everett video show from England, or the SCTV show from Canada. That was when my eyes were glued to the boob tube. But unfortunately, those were also times when there were a lot of commercials, and my mind would drift through those. I would go look out the window at the park at night until the commercials were over. It was dark out there and pretty desolate. Jersey City was not the safest place in those days, and I did see a lady get her purse snatched one night. But like I said, on 3 nights, I saw a werewolf or dogman chugging along down under my window over by the greenery of the park. On one occasion, my sister was up late with me watching Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, showing late night on Channel 9, because she had this weird crush on Alan Ormsby for whatever reason. She also saw the creature on the sidewalk, and she leaned out my window and snapped a flash picture of it. It didn't show anything when we finally got it developed weeks later, but the flash going off did alarm the creature, who ran off into the night. Now, I don't think it was a dogman-like animal because there was no place for an animal to be walking to over there. It's all urban. I also don't think it was a costume person because the legs were all weird and strange. I personally think it was a shapeshifter, like a werewolf, but feline instead of canine. In my opinion, there was a werewolf cat in Jersey City in those days. And although we would go on to see plenty of strange things when we moved to Hoboken, we never again saw anything so strange as the Catman of Van Borst Park.
It's a classic pullover, play with the scary stories, got it. It's a classic pullover, bloody and hysterical to go. Available in white, black, navy, gray, or pink. Link is in the description.
The Werewolf and the Newsladies. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story for you from so long ago that I'm sure most of your viewers weren't even born yet. I'm about to tell you stuff that happened when I was a very young man, and I was working at my uncle's local TV station in a certain dogman-heavy Midwestern state. Some of us even called him the Dogman already way back then. Some of us who were born and raised locally, that is. The Dogman legend stretches back further than the loggers who claimed they invented the creature as an entertaining tall tale. No, the Dogman has been here for longer than the human race. That's a pretty long time. Now, my grandchildren are even more obnoxious than their parents were, and they seem to think that they invented a lot of things, like feminism. No, we already had feminism back in '72, only we called it women's lib or women's liberation. I was all for women's liberation. A few years prior to that, you had to marry a woman to get her in bed. Thanks to women's liberation, I didn't even have to remember a woman's name and I could still wind up in bed with her. It was truly a magical time. You think these kids today are gross? You should have seen my generation. At least before AIDS hit. We were like the Romans, believe me. So, my story is going to tie together the Midwestern Dogman and the sexual revolution, at least if you bear with this old man while I collect my thoughts. In those days, I was a young producer at the TV station, which sounds impressive, but just means that I ran around doing a lot of different kinds of work. One of my ideas that I got on the air, at least for a little while, was a news show starring 2 female reporters. That was a new thing at the time to have women on like Barbara Walters or whatever. Only I was a guy not yet 25, so I hired younger and prettier reporters than Barbara Walters. In those days, though, you weren't taken seriously as a newswoman unless you were kind of ugly or if you had a speech impediment or something weird like that. So my idea of 2 pretty women doing investigative reporting never really got off the ground back then. We did on-the-street interviews for a pilot episode of an evening news-fotainment show, although I don't think we used that term back then yet. We got a chance to do 3 or 4 pilot episodes and they all aired, but none of them got good ratings, supposedly. Everywhere I went with either or both of those 2 women for the next couple years, though, people recognized them from the TV. They remembered their names and everything, so I don't understand how that didn't translate into ratings. At any rate, I was dating one of them at the time when this story happened, and I'm currently still married to the other one. Let's call them Cagney and Lacey, since their initials were actually C and L. I had to explain these 2 ladies to you because it was actually the 2 of them who physically touched the Dogman. We were out in a tan VW van that was owned by the TV station, but it wasn't marked in any way so that you would know it was owned by them. It was Cagney and Lacey in the back with our cameraman riding shotgun up front and me driving. We had been shooting on-the-street interviews about some then-current subject like Watergate or women's lib or something, and now the 4 of us wanted to go out and get a few drinks. People still used to go to the bar and get plastered together as a matter of course in those days. Those were good times. On the way out of town to a particular bar that the girls wanted to check out, we ran over a nail and it blew out one of the rear tires. The cameraman and I got out and man, we were in a bad place to be stuck. It was dark. It was cold. And we were still out in the lane people had to drive in. There wasn't any room to pull off the road over there. We were right smack up against some trees. and there was a large, fenced-off, overgrown, vacant area on the other side of the street. The wind was blowing so hard that it was whistling, and I was shaking all over, as much from the cold as from the creepy vibe I was getting from that location. The cameraman and I were working in the back setting up flares to prevent anyone from driving into us, and then we got into the job of swapping out the tire for our spare. So we were in the back on the street side of the van, and unbeknownst to us, the two young news ladies had gotten out and were standing by the trees on the opposite side of us men. They were in the front of the van and we were in the back. So the two of us were focused on changing the tire when we hear the women making sweet noises up front, like baby sounds or something. I got jealous that maybe my girl was flirting with some man, so I stood up and peered around the van. That was when I saw what this whole story is about. That was when I saw the Dogman. So this was a two-legged critter. Big. His legs were bent like a dog's legs. The hind legs, I mean. But his were thick as telephone poles, and he looked like he walked upright all the time. We didn't see him walk on all fours that night, and I don't know if he ever did. I believe this was a creature that walked the way we humans do. It was definitely not a man, though. It had a head like a dog or a wolf, but with a mane around his head that reminded me of a lion's mane more than anything else. Its eyes were bright red, like bicycle reflectors or car taillights, and they were lit from inside, or at least they sure looked like they were. Even though the legs looked very canine, the arms looked humanoid and incredibly muscular. They ended in hands, albeit clawed hands. This was like a furry version of the Hulk, with a lion's mane. I remember the fur being gray all over. My wife, who admittedly got much closer, says that the face and the tall ears were sort of pink or Caucasian flesh-colored, and the fur, which started on the cheeks and did not cover the entire face, was a bluish-grayish combination of shades, and was kept very well groomed by the beast. I can attest to the fact that neither of the women complained of fleas later on. When I first saw this big thing, standing on the street and facing the woods and the two women, Cagney and Lacey had already made friends with it. The two women were both touching this thing on its nasty-looking head. They were patting it and cooing like it was the cutest baby puppy. It was a literal monster, bigger than me by well over a foot. That thing must have weighed as much as 2 men or 3. At this point, the cameraman, who was a little guy just about the size of the women, he stood up and came over and he saw the thing there too. He whispers to me, he says, "That's a Michigan Dogman." I say, "No, that's a Wisconsin werewolf." So we both of us had heard legends about this thing, but neither of the ladies had. They had no idea of the reputation of this beast. It could have bitten their pretty hands off in one bite, I'm sure. But that Dogman, he didn't look like he had violence on his mind when he was looking at those women. In fact, from the way he was checking the two of them out, I got the impression there was a lot of man in that dog, if you know what I'm hinting at. Now, granted, Cagney and Lacey were a sight to see in those days. My wife still is, of course. But in those days, they got the wolf whistles from the men, so it shouldn't seem surprising that the wolf man came along and found them just as pretty as the human wolves had. But Cagney and Lacey, they weren't seeing it as a sexual beast leering at them. They thought he was drooling because he was a canine, even if he was an upright one and his body resembled a circus sideshow strongman more than it resembled an ordinary pooch. It bent over so the girls could scratch the top of its head, and they thought that was so cute. Meanwhile, the beast was staring at their legs. That was the miniskirt era, and so he had a lot to look at. I started to get jealous, and I wanted to go over there and punch that Dogman. The camera guy had a more level head. He told me he was going to try and get some silent footage of the girls petting the monster. In those pre-video camera days, we shot on 16mm film. When we shot sound, we used a camera that recorded the sound onto the 16mm film in a way similar to how Super 8 sound film worked. But most of the time, if it was something happening like a house fire, we shot using the handheld silent 16mm camera that was operated by cranking it like a toy. So the cameraman walked toward the scene, coming at it from behind the monster and to its side. He was looking down at the camera and cranking it over and over and over again to wind it up. The dogman heard this weird cranking sound and he turned and looked right at that cameraman. But before the guy even looked up, the dogman had grabbed him and thrown him and the camera between the two ladies and down a ravine between the trees and the woods alongside the road. The cameraman was screaming as he got pretty banged up, falling down that incline in the dark. Then it was my turn to scream when I saw the dogman turn and look at me, with eyes that looked like they were on fire inside. I had never seen anything like it. I still have nightmares that I'm outside on a cold night in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly the dogman sees me there. It's the worst feeling, just a terrible nightmare to have. So, like I was saying, the cameraman was screaming in the woods, I was screaming on the road, but the ladies were still cooing to the dogman. I guess I'm glad they were, because his fur was standing on end. He looked pretty agitated. He showed me his fangs, and they look longer than my hand. So if it took baby talk to save my life, then I'll have to deal with it. Cagney and Lacey were going to town, telling the dogman how big and strong he was, and how much bigger he looked when his fur stood on end like that. The creature was eating it up. He clearly craved attention from my then-girlfriend and my future wife, just as much as all us human males did at that time. Some guys drove by right then, and they saw me, the van, the monster, and the two girls, and they screeched to a stop. Had the monster caught their attention? No, they were fans of the girls, and they called out to them from their car. It was almost as if there weren't a 7 or 8 foot tall man-eating dogman monster standing between their car and the girls. Well, whether or not those healthy young men noticed the dogman certainly noticed them, and it leapfrogged over the ladies and into the woods. A second or two later, I heard the cameraman scream again, as apparently the dogman ran over him to make good his escape. While Cagney and Lacey were signing autographs on the guys' chests, I helped the cameraman out of the woods. He had failed to get any footage, but he had managed to save the camera from getting mashed up. It would have taken a lot to destroy that thing. It was made to be used in combat. But if anything could have destroyed it, that big bruiser of a dogman could have. So neither of the women had heard of the dogman or even of Bigfoot, if you can imagine. Those were simpler times, and monsters were more of something guys found interesting than girls. Of course, these days my wife likes to claim she's an expert on the Midwestern dogman. After all, how many people can claim that they reached out and touched a real wolfman?
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright. Scary Stories coloring book, Werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
The dogman slobbered on my meat. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, recounting the unbelievable tale of how a creature straight out of folklore managed to outsmart my security system and pilfer meat from my freezer. It sounds utterly absurd, I know, but what I experienced was beyond explanation. It all started a few weeks ago when I heard strange noises coming from downstairs. At first I dismissed it as the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling in for the night. However, the persistent scratching and thumping grew louder, unsettling my already frayed nerves. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, I decided to investigate. As I descended the stairs, an icy chill crept up through me, sending shivers down my arms. What I encountered next defied all logic and reason as far as I'm concerned. Standing in my kitchen was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It stood tall on two legs, covered in fur, with piercing yellow eyes that seemed to gleam with intelligence. In that moment, I felt like I had stepped into a nightmare. But what struck me the most was how it had somehow bypassed my security system. As someone who prides myself on the latest technology safeguarding my home, witnessing this creature outsmart it was nothing short of baffling. I watched in stunned silence as it made its way to my freezer, deftly opening it and helping itself to the contents within. It didn't take long for me to realize that the meat I had stored was its target. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was dealing with some kind of a meat thief. In a panic, I scrambled to make sense of this situation. How had it managed to disable my security system? What was this creature? Why was it raiding my freezer? Questions swirled in my mind, but one thing was for sure. I needed to find a way to protect myself and my home from whatever this thing was. Since that night, I can't sleep. I've been on high alert, taking every precaution to fortify my home and keep this mysterious intruder at bay. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that I'm no match for whatever this ancient force is that has set its sights on my humble abode. So here I am, haunted by the memory of that encounter, grappling with the terrifying realization that in the darkness of the night, there are things that defy explanation and lurk beyond the edge of reason. How do you use a modern security system to defeat an ancient menace? General Zod from the Phantom Zone has purchased a t-shirt from us, and so he becomes our executive producer for this episode. We'll tell you all about the General right after this word from the merch item he bought.
Find that link in the description, honey.
General Zod from the Phantom Zone. Pull one of our t-shirts to a third for its crimes against Krypton. In the comics, I guess, or maybe in that movie, but I digress. Thank you, General. Man of a man. Thank you, General. Bigger than man. Thank you, General. You are so great. And Superman never bought a t-shirt. So General great.
The Werewolf Family behind my grandma's house. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I had a dream the other night that caused me to remember old stories from my childhood that I had completely buried away back then, and this would be so long ago that the Beatles were still together. I had a grandmother who lived outside of town on a road with no other houses on it. I was told it used to be a whole town with a lot more houses, but the local business dried up. I forget if it was a mine or oil or what, but eventually the earth ran out of whatever it was, and these people all had to move on. My grandmother was still there, but her husband had passed away before I was born, and a lot of Grandma's mind went with him, it seemed. I was never sure how much of what I was saying she was understanding, and I think, 13 when she left us. No, I was 14. But even when I was 7 or 8, I understood that Granny was not all there. At least not all the time. Sometimes she would talk about the old days, and it was beautiful. Her eyes were lit up with the memories, and her stories made sense and were funny and moving. But then she'd be gone again, and everything felt empty where it had been full seconds earlier. Her body would still be there, but her mind was long gone. Sometimes Granny would talk about big teddy bears that lived behind her house in the summer and autumn, and my mother would cry because of how crazy her mother was sounding. But Grandma would soothe her and say, "Don't cry, they'll be fine. I leave out food for the big teddy bears." My mother would get angry at her, telling her not to waste food on imaginary teddy bears. Grandma kept insisting they were real, though. I didn't get why my mother was so upset. I wanted to see them myself. I asked if I could leave out food for the big teddy bears next time. Grandma said, "Oh no, you're far too young. They're too large and their teeth are as pointed as their tall ears." My teddy bear at home had round ears, which is why I remember Grandma saying her giant ones had pointed ears. I figured at the time that was the difference between real teddy bears and dolls of them. The real ones had pointed ears. So when Grandma passed, I had to go back and forth with my mother, emptying things out of the old house. Some of it we moved to our house, mostly to the attic and basement, and a lot of it we put out for trash. One evening, when my mother and I were at Grandma's later into the day, I looked out the back and, for the first time, I saw them. The giant teddy bears. I pointed them out to my mother, who nearly fainted. Then Mom insisted those were not teddy bears. Those were werewolves. They did indeed have pointed ears, more like a dog than a bear, and there were 2 of them. One was the daddy teddy bear, and the other one was his very small toddler teddy bear. But my mother used to date this native guy before she married my father, and she told me those were evil wizards who changed into animal form, or partially animal form. I asked her if that big creature is so evil, why was he or she walking its evil toddler out back of the house? I figured it was probably sensing stirring in the house and wondering if it could get a meal for itself and his baby monster man. My mother was having none of this, and she held my head down under the windows so that the werewolf couldn't see me. She kept saying that evil wizards eat bad children, but I wasn't being bad, and those weren't evil wizards. They were Grandma's friends, and they were hungry. So Mom and I snuck out of there eventually, and I was never allowed back at the house. Wizards eat bad children, after all. I did see the 2 of them when we drove out in the country near Grandma's old house for some other reason, I forget. It was maybe half a year or 8 months later, and I saw the big werewolf walking along the road toward the tree line. I tried to point it out to my family, but people were talking about Bob Dylan or something, and they told me to shush. I saw the big creature walking with another one, taller than the baby had been. Maybe that was the baby partially grown up, or maybe that was a mate for the large one. I didn't get to see long enough to really make an educated guess. Since then, I've never seen any more cryptids, although I did briefly date a lawyer, which is a different kind of mythical creature. But I'm still sticking by my story of the werewolf family behind my grandma's house.
You'll have to put keyboard your mouse to scratch out that desk with more than you. But here's an idea that's lots of fun. Cover your desk with Dogman and Son. Dogman and Son desk mat. Mouse pad for your entire desk. Dogman and Son desk mat. It's rather Kafkaesque.
Order yours today. Link is in the description.
Dogman found my lost cell phone. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I lost my cell phone recently and it was driving me crazy. I searched all over my house and I couldn't find it. I was quite depressed when I went to bed that night, having no idea where I had put it. That night I woke up to go to the bathroom, and as I was on my way back to bed, I saw lights moving outside on my front porch. Curious, I went over and peeked out the window as sneakily as I could, in case it was a burglar or something like that. Well, it wasn't a burglar, but I was still glad it didn't notice me looking out at it. Because what was out on my porch was something that absolutely took my breath away. It was the size of a very, very large man, and it had dark fur. It was roughly man-shaped, and it was facing away from me. Bigfoot. I figured it must be a Sasquatch out on my porch here in western Pennsylvania. I had heard that they lived around here, but I had not seen one myself. It was terrifying looking at a monster standing on my porch literally 3 or 4 feet away from me, on the other side of that glass. On the other hand, I couldn't look away. I had to keep staring. I do remember pinching myself to try to wake up, but I was awake all right. I had just gone to the bathroom, and now I was in the cold hallway of my one-story home, looking out at an actual real-life monster. Well, things got a lot more interesting when all of a sudden this monster turned a bit to its left, and I could make it out in profile. The thing had a dog's head. It wasn't a Sasquatch at all. It was some kind of a werewolf or a dogman. And what's more, it was holding my cell phone and staring at it in amazement. In fact, he looked more amazed of my cell phone than I was of him. I had come home with groceries that evening, and when I got my key out to come inside, I must have dropped my cell phone out there on the porch. Lights from the touch screen illuminated the face of the monster as it stared in surprise at each new thing it observed. This was the first and only time I regretted keeping my phone unlocked so that anyone could use it. Now, while I insist that I was not asleep at the time this happened, I was certainly groggy and not thinking clearly, because at one point I actually got up and ran back to my bedroom to get my cell phone to take a picture of the monster outside, who was using my cell phone. Then I realized that if anyone was going to take pics with that cell phone, it was going to be the dogman himself. So I ran back to the window, and sure enough, the creature was scrolling through something. I don't know what app he had opened, but whatever it was, he already seemed addicted to it. I kept fretting and staring because it seemed there had to be something I should be doing. I wanted to call my friends, but it was 3 a.m. I wanted to call the police, but I figured they'd think I was crazy. And I also wanted to run to my storage room to see if I still had that old film camera, and if any film was in it. But I didn't do any of those things. I just squatted there by the window, staring at the monster outside, hoping that he didn't look inside and see me looking back out at him. Well, eventually the creature got the phone to open up YouTube for him, and unfortunately I had left the volume up at maximum. When he clicked on a joke video one of my friends had recently uploaded, all of a sudden, Rick Astley was singing his famous song loudly enough to wake the dead. Dogman reacted to being rickrolled a bit more harshly than most of us would. He threw my cell phone down onto the porch. When the music continued blasting, he stomped on the phone, and then he picked it up and hurled it so far that I never found any remains of it ever again after that. Extremely agitated, the dogman did this kind of upset tantrum thing for a few seconds, before he elicited a kind of a high-pitched barking, like a much smaller dog might make, and then he ran off into the night, in the opposite direction from where he'd thrown my poor cell phone. No doubt he felt that little box was the product of witchcraft or something. The stupid animal cost me almost $1,000 to replace that phone, and my new one doesn't work half as well as the old one. But I'll tell you one thing that I do different with that new phone. I keep that touchscreen locked.
If I wear a spinny hat, will I look all hunky? Will I look like that handsome chap from that TV show, The Monkees? Everybody wants a wooden cat. The scary stories, beanie in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Werewolf out on a factory ledge. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I come from a traditional Irish-American family, and part of St. Patrick's Day for us each year was watching the adults in our family get plastered and cry about stories that didn't seem so sad to us kids most of the time. We would bet each other each year which adult was going to start crying first. We were a very emotional family. One of my uncles, let's call him Sam because he was a patriotic American, would tell the story of the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. And that would be when his eyes would tear up and he'd begin to bawl. This was my favorite of all the stories the grown-ups would tell. Partially that was because the story was weird. Also it was partially because this was a story about a dogman, I guess. Or a werewolf. I grew up in Queens and Long Island, but my Uncle Sam came from the Boston area. This story happened before I was born, when Uncle Sam was working in a factory up near Boston somewhere. I would probably guess the story to have happened like just after the JFK thing or just before the Beatles, so probably 1963-ish. The story doesn't have anything to do with JFK or the Beatles though. So Uncle Sam said it would get really hot in the factory when they were pulling an all-nighter, trying to get a rush job out to meet a deadline. Whenever he would get a chance to take a break, he would head to any opened window and stick his head outside to remember what air smelled like. That was the way he would put it, so I can only imagine what it must have been like inside those old buildings on hot nights, with the big old machines making everything that much hotter. Anyway, my uncle leaned out the window to get some air, and he looked around. It was a cool night outside, and it was getting really foggy down below. He was up on the second or third floor, and the fog was almost reaching up to his floor. He started to wonder if it was that bad down on street level, and if it was, how he was going to be able to find his way home through it. So while he was looking left and right to get a better idea of what was going on with all that fog, my uncle was surprised to notice a big dark figure standing on a ledge of the factory, like he was going to jump. My uncle instinctively shouted out, "Don't do it," to the guy, like, "Don't jump." And the dark figure, who had been facing away from my uncle, turned around to look at him. And that was when my Uncle Sam noticed that this was a big, furry wolfman. Not like in the movies, he would always insist. This was no Long Chaney BS. This was a real big, muscle-bound wolf that was standing up like a man because it was a man. That would blow the minds of us kids. He was standing like a man because he was a man. Whoa. So we would always pepper Sam with questions, no matter how many times we'd heard the story before. Did you talk to him? What did he say? And so on. Sam said he tried to talk to him, but the wolf-headed man never spoke back, so he never knew if it was understanding him or not. All he knew for sure was that the two of them locked eyes for a long moment. And then, to my uncle's horror, the wolfman calmly walked off the edge of the ledge and dropped into that thick fog like an anchor. My uncle said he watched and he listened, and he neither saw nor heard anything down there below. Soon he heard the foreman calling him back to work from inside though, and so the mystery of the wolfman on the ledge would have to wait. Sam was too afraid of what the others would say if he shared what he saw. But after quitting time, he walked around to the area that the wolfman would have had to have dropped down into. He didn't find the creature, nor any significant disturbance of the ground over there to even show where the creature might have landed. And then my Uncle Sam would end the story the same way each time, asking, what if he didn't land? What if he just jumped into the fog and never landed? And that was always when Uncle Sam would start openly weeping, and the other men would pat him on the shoulder and tell him it was okay for an Irishman to cry. and that he did them proud with his story and encouraging stuff like that. We kids would still have more questions, but the adults would put the TV on with some cartoons or something, and they'd tell us to never interrupt a man when he's having himself a good long cry. So then we kids would watch Speed Racer or whatever, and we'd forget, until next March, all about the werewolf out on the factory ledge.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright. Scary Stories coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
Once again, our EP's Carnagon, the guy who's got it going on. I know I've been naming John Carnagon executive producer a lot lately, but he's been donating to us using our thanks button here on YouTube a lot lately. And it's those donations that keep us making new episodes, because with that money I can buy rice and pasta to give me the strength to get out of bed and make new shows for you guys. I have to return to thanking each and every one of the channel members and PayPal Club members starting next episode, but this episode is once again brought to us all through the kind donations of John Carnagon. If you want to find out what perks John gets in return, then listen to our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.